Surviving the prisoner of war experience, inside the lives of two men who went through hell and lived to tell about it. Documentary by Laura Neer. Primo Levi, the author of Survival in Auschwitz and many other books, was a survivor of the Holocaust. He was a prisoner of war captured in December 1943 by the fascist militia in Italy. He was then transferred to a detention camp. The camp he was at also had American and English prisoners of war. While he was at the camp, over 600 more Jews showed up in the span of 2 weeks. Next thing he knew, he was being told that all Jews are going to be transported to another camp, and he along with them. They were loaded into a freight train. They were crammed into the cars with very little space to move. On the way there, they learned they were going to Auschwitz, but none of them knew what that meant.
Questi treni merci che vediamo passando, che effetto le fanno?
Ecco, direi che sono proprio i treni merci il riflesso scatenante, quello che mi fa più impressione, perché ancora adesso vedere un vagone merci, tanto più entrare in un vagone merci, mi dà un effetto violento, rievocatorio, insomma. Molto più, direi, che non rivedere i paesi e i luoghi, Auschwitz stessa. L'aver viaggiato per 5 giorni in un vagone merci piombato è un'esperienza che...
Once they step off the train into Auschwitz, they are immediately separated.
Loro madri quando...
sono stati uccisi subito. Dei 650 che eravamo in questo treno, i 4/5 sono morti la notte stessa o la notte dopo. Sono stati smistati direttamente alle camere a gas.
Once they arrive, he was placed in a room to wait for hours upon hours. Everyone is dehydrated and thirsty, but the only source of water is a dripping water tap with a sign telling people not to drink from it. Levi tries to drink it anyways, but spits it out for it was toxic. They were then forced to strip naked while people came in and took their belongings, while other people shaved their heads. They are left standing naked and freezing in a room for several more hours. They cannot sit down, for 2 inches of freezing cold water covers the floor. They are told by a fellow prisoner who has already been there for a while that they have concerts sometimes and that they play soccer in the courtyard, but Levi knew it wasn't true. He later learned where they really were and spent his time working with chemicals, which gave him special privileges since he was a chemist.
Il mio campo, i 10.000 prigionieri, Monowitz appunto, faceva parte di una industria appartenente alla IG Farbenindustrie, che era un enorme trust chimico tedesco, adesso smantellato. Si trattava di costruire una nuova fabbrica di prodotti chimici dell'area di qualcosa come 6 km quadrati. Il lager di Monowitz, fatto quasi esclusivamente di ebrei, doveva fornire la manodopera non qualificata. Nonostante tutto, siccome la manodopera specialistica era molto scarsa in Germania allora per via degli uomini al fronte, a partire da un certo periodo hanno cercato anche fra di noi, teoricamente manovali e schiavi, gli specialisti. Hanno cercato chi, fin dal primo giorno, dal giorno di ingresso nel lager di Monowitz, è stata una specie di ricerca anagrafica, hanno chiesto a tutti l'età, il titolo di studio e il mestiere. E questa è stata una delle mie fortune, perché io mi sono dichiarato chimico senza sapere che eravamo addetti a una fabbrica di prodotti chimici. E questo mi ha portato poi molto più avanti qualche vantaggio, perché ho lavorato gli ultimi 2 mesi dentro un laboratorio.
They are then given a hot shower that everyone enjoyed, but immediately after they are forced outside into the snow where they are given ragged clothes and worn-out shoes, while tattoos are placed on their arms. He was not liberated until January of 1945. There were many people who experienced similar experiences during this time, but every story is different. Take Leon G. Neer of the American military, for example. Leon G. Neer was an American soldier fighting the war effort in World War II. He fought in the Battle of the Bulge and was captured by Germany on December 16, 1944. He was sent to Stalag 10A, but there was not adequate room for all the prisoners of war, so they were moved to another camp, some by train and some by truck, but Leon Neer was forced to march through the snow to Stalag 9B in Bad Orb, Germany. Once they arrived at the camp, they were forced to strip naked and their clothes were taken. Their hair was shorn and they were taken to the showers before they were given new clothes. This was the last shower many of them had until their liberation in 1945. This was also the last set of clothes they were given. There were no changes of clothing, including socks and underwear. They lived in unheated, unlit wooden barracks with dirt floors. They slept in bunk beds filled with lice, stacked 3 levels high, and oftentimes slept with around 5 men per bed to keep body warmth, for there was not access to enough blankets for everyone. Stalag 9B is oftentimes considered the worst of the Germany camps that housed American POWs. There was severe overcrowding, deplorable facilities, and diets that consisted of starvation. Guards also brutalized captives and made the lives of American privates even worse than it already was. Many people suffered from dysentery, which caused people to make frequent trips to the bathroom that was a hole in the ground in the corner of the barrack. In April 1945, an order is issued for American troops to break through German lines and go north about 60 kilometers to liberate Stalag 9B in Bad Orb, Germany. The mission is launched on April 2, 1945, but before the camp was liberated, 1,500 of the prisoners of war were taken to march east, since they were anticipating the American liberation. But a man named Eddie Pivenstell convinced the camp's medical officer that marching weak and ill men would result in only death. This postponed the march east until the camp was liberated and the prisoners were rescued. Neer went on to go back home to Holly, Michigan, where he continued his life working as a machine operator, continuing to grow his family. He was honorably discharged from the United States military. The United States government offered awards for people who survived being a POW in Japan or Germany during World War II. Neer filed for this and got a grand total of $150 for being a POW for 102 days.
Leon was my dad's father. He was my grandpa. I learned that my grandfather was in one of the most famous battles in World War II history. And growing up, I didn't really know that. But in researching about his time being a prisoner of war, I've been able to find records that told about how he was captured at the very first day, the beginning of the Battle of the Bulge, when the Americans were, surprised in a surprise attack. He was captured that very first day. Grandpa never really told stories about the war, and so I've had to do a lot of independent reading. And the little that I did know from my grandmother is I knew that when he initially was captured, he did a long death march from where he was captured to Germany. And they call it a death march because a lot of people died along the way. And then when they got to where they were going, to the camp that they were going to stay in, they weren't fed for days and days and days. It was so full of people there wasn't hardly room to even lay down or anything. It was just really, really bad conditions. But what sticks with me is that he never talked about that as, how poorly he was treated, or, he never sought sympathy or any kind of, like, oh, this happened to me. Instead, he just always kept it inside. And that kind of sticks with me. Most of the stories that I've heard about my grandfather being a prisoner of war came from my grandma, because he never really said much about it. And we always had questions because we had heard and knew that he had been a prisoner. And so she used to tell me about it. No, when I first heard the story, I had absolutely no idea how bad it was. Like I say, he never complained or anything. He just didn't really talk about it. So I had no sense of how bad it really was. But later, through stories with my grandma, I knew that he had lots of nightmares and all kinds of things that I just never knew about and never understood how bad it was, but later found out it was. They've never really said, I don't remember them talking about that specifically, but I know there was concern about whether he would come home and that maybe he'd been killed because it was quite a bit of time there where they didn't know where he was, and he wasn't communicating or anything. If you're actually talking about the POW experience, while a POW, I don't think I could have handled it. It was really, really bad. And if you mean afterwards, how would I handled it? I probably would have, I would have talked to and told more about my experience than I remember him doing. Yeah. Through old war records, I was able to find his application where he sought compensation for having been a prisoner of war. And for the 102 days that he was prisoner, what they call an award was just $105. And I understand that, but only because I know it's military and that, but I think, man, that's not nearly the value for what he suffered. I'd say it's impacted my life in just that I have such an appreciation for what their sacrifice was at that time during the war, and so much more in tune with what he went through and the price that was paid that we have freedoms that we have today. And it makes me sad sometimes when people don't appreciate those freedoms anymore and want to give them up. And I think, wow, this is what somebody went through, someone I know, someone I'm related to, and how easily the next generation seems to have forgotten it.
Both Levy and Near experienced such life-changing events, some of which were similar but also contrasted in many different ways. Their stories both contribute so much to history and the way they were able to live through it and continue to share with the world about what it was like being a POW in these two brutal camps. Without them sharing what it was like, we could not be able to fully understand, as such a privileged society, what it was really like as a person who lived through the brutality surrounding the Nazi regime.